My name is Emma Graney. I am the energy reporter with the Globe and Mail here in beautiful Calgary. Favourite place I've lived in Canada. I do mean that. I'm not just saying it because I'm in Calgary. I promise. But we have a really, really cool panel here today, basically talking about how renewables are fitting in with Alberta. I feel like a lot of people don't know about this topic. It's pretty neat. There's some cool stuff going on. And we have a panel of, All-Stars. Hey, that's where the song came on. Thank you, Janelle, audio person. You're a champion. So I'm just going to basically leave it to these guys to introduce themselves and how they fit into the Alberta renewables picture. So Nagwan, off you go.
Awesome. Well, hi, everybody. Love the full room today. I'm Nagwan Al-Guneid. I'm the director of the Business Renewables Centre Canada. And the way we fit in this picture, we basically focus on the education piece and raising the awareness around power purchase agreements, which translate into large-scale renewables here in Alberta. We work with corporations, with municipalities, with towns to learn more how to close a financial transaction that is really complex. So we are an initiative of the Pembina Institute, a registered charity, and we operate here on Treaty 7 land in Calgary.
Good afternoon. Great to follow you, Nagwan. Have a lot of respect for the work you're doing at BRC. I'm Dan Balaban. I'm the CEO of Greengate. We're a company that develops large-scale renewable energy projects. To describe kind of simply what we do is we take an idea for a renewable energy project and work on it for many years, invest the time and effort and money to turn it into a project that's generating clean electrons. We've been doing it for 15 years in the heart of oil country. We've been responsible for some precedent-setting projects. Largest wind farm in the country when we did it about 10 years ago, and we're currently under construction with our partners, Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, on the largest solar project in the country. So like doing the biggest renewable energy projects in the heart of oil country. It's a lot of fun.
How you doing? I'm Jason Chialoy, Managing Director with Power Advisory. Power Advisory is a consulting firm, and I'm the one that I guess that doesn't belong. All these Albertans up here, I'm from Toronto, so don't hold it against me. But I'm here all the time, though. I'm here all the time. I'm coming back next week. We do have an office in Calgary, and we're quite busy in the space, helping corporate PPA transactions, helping assess the market, people build things, connect things, operate things, and invest things. So pleased to be here. Our practice runs across the country and into the U.S.
Hi, everybody. I'm Terry Hickey. I'm actually with TELUS. Stepped in a little late in the game.
Yes, thank you, Terry. Someone in our team got the plague.
how we fit into this? So I'm a senior strategy manager at TELUS, and I work in sustainability. I've been involved in 4 negotiations for power purchase agreements for renewable energy within Alberta. TELUS is actually the off-taker for 167 megawatts of renewable energy across 3 solar farms and 1 wind farm, all active within Alberta. So it's pretty key to our environmental strategy to hit our corporate target of net carbon neutral by 2030. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we're using that to attack our Scope 2 emissions. So that's why I'm here.
And thanks again, Terry, for stepping in at the last moment. What a champion. So I do want to start off with corporate power purchase arrangements. And honestly, when you first say those words, it's like, oh my God, corporate. Ugh, that sounds horrible. But as Nagwan can explain, it's actually really neat. So I just wanted to start off by chatting about kind of what's happening here in Alberta, what's happening on the ground, and I believe you have some fancy schmancy slides.
I just have 2 slides. I promise this is not going to be long.
They're fancy.
We have a stunning graph that I always like to start with. We are closely becoming the wind and solar capital of Canada. Our analysis shows a $3.75 billion worth of renewables construction here in Alberta by next year, and 4,500 jobs will come with that. You will see back in 2019, okay, this is better, we established the goal of 2 gigawatts of renewables on the grid by 2025. we already crushed this target, and we're really surprised by that, 3 years ahead of schedule. So when you hear about renewable deals happening here in Alberta, like TELUS or RBC, and I see RBC here too, TC Energy, Amazon, who is an off-taker with the Traverse project, this is what's happening. Basically, corporations go directly and close that transaction with the wind or solar developers. We have what we call a deregulated electricity market, and this jargon means exactly that. They can close the deal directly without the need of utilities. It's a unique experience here in Alberta, and it's a competitive advantage. We are taking the lion's share of investments right now, and all this contributes to grid decarbonization. And companies are the #1 driver behind this boom because they have ESG commitments. They're trying to address Scope 2 emissions, and they're serious about the commitments. The other reason they're doing it because they're hedging. They're locking a price for the long term, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So it's a competitive process or a competitive price for them. It's a win for the environment, win for the companies, and win for our economy. One last slide here is the trend we're seeing. We're seeing a diversity of the sectors. So you see telecom, oil and gas, food and beverage, technology. We even had our first cryptocurrency company last year. Another trend we're seeing is municipalities getting into that. The city of Edmonton signed 2 PPAs this year, again, to reach their net zero commitment. And finally, the trend we're seeing as well is that human-centric approach to the PPAs, which basically means they want to see Indigenous equity in the renewable projects to advance their truth and reconciliation objectives. So lots of exciting things.
It's really neat, actually. I know, and I'm just going to ask you on this because we did speak about this once for a story I wrote, but were you expecting Alberta to hit the targets that it did as quickly as it did?
We are really surprised. We did not see that coming. It's exciting. It only shows the commitment of companies to the ESG commitments they've put, the net zero targets.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
I want to throw to you here, Dan. We were talking about, well, you mentioned there, Nagwan, the deregulated power market. So how has that made a difference for you guys when it comes to operating in Alberta?
So as Nagwan mentioned, it creates a unique opportunity in Alberta. So across Canada, every other province is a regulated power market, meaning it's controlled by a provincially owned utility. But in Alberta, it's an open market, so that creates all sorts of commercial innovation around how projects can be made economic. Basically, if project can successfully get through the permitting process, connect into the grid, and build an economic case, it can be built. In addition to that, we've got phenomenal renewable energy resources. We've got great fossil fuel resources, which everybody knows about, but great wind, great solar, among the best in North America, and we actually have a functioning carbon market. Another thing that's probably not that well known, but Alberta has one of the most robust carbon pricing regimes in North America through our TIER program, and that combination of things is driving a lot of renewable energy growth in this province.
Well, and I know when we were speaking before this panel and you kind of commented it isn't new, like this has been happening for a while, but how is it changing? And Jason, yeah. I'll get you weighed in this as well, mate.
Yeah, it has been going on for a while. Alberta was one of the first places in North America to deploy, utility scale wind in the Pincher Creek area, but it's come in fits and spurts. But what's really changed, I think, is this corporate PPA opportunity, which has created all sorts of good financial underpinnings for projects to go ahead. And I think we're also seeing a tsunami of capital that's looking to invest in the renewable energy sector globally, and have now finally set their sights on Alberta.
Yeah, Jason, what is happening on the ground now here that you've been noticing? All the way from out there in the east?
A lot of activity, and good activity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing about Alberta is it's just been I know this is going to sound weird to some people. You think every market, your market's messed up, but this one's been the most consistent, right? In terms of, there's a certain culture in Alberta in terms of competition. It's not just with electricity, it's oil and gas, it's other commodities, it's other industries. And for the most part, the government's let the market work. But I also think that's a testament to boots on the ground, whether it be suppliers or customers or companies in the middle providing services. And I think a lot of other jurisdictions could learn from that, frankly. And basically, I don't think Alberta started with, okay, this market will deliver X, Y, and Z. They just let the market forces work. And that's what's happened with wind and solar. In Alberta, the market forces are working.
Does it surprise you when you look at what's happening in Alberta that the market forces are working as successfully as they are?
It doesn't, because, like I said, there's the culture, but if I get a little bit more detailed, it's also the framework as well. At the end of the day, the decisions have been made years ago where the transmission network is built out all the time to enable connections, so there's a lot of space on the grid for the electrons to flow. A lot of jurisdictions don't do that, and so there's a lot of bottlenecks on the system. So it's a lot easier, as Dan was saying, to, site your project, build it, connect it, inject the energy, and the business is there to do offtake agreements with customers.
You make that sound so easy. I'm assuming it's just like that, yeah?
It's
No
just
problems?
like that here relative to
Yeah.
everywhere else. I mean, the one thing that I will say is, I was short in my introduction, I helped admittedly design the Ontario market. And then I was the guy doing all the contracting after we screwed up the design. So I can tell you what not to do, and I'm telling
get
you, you're
into
doing
that.
it right in Alberta.
I think we will get into that later, only because I really want to, because Alberta,
Okay.
Ah, cool. I did want to flip to you here, Terry, because obviously you guys have come, and PPAs are obviously an attractive prospect for you. Is that to do with the ESG targets? Is that to do with just generally trying to look or be better as a company?
Yeah, it's definitely looking at the ESG targets. Again, if we're going to be net carbon neutral, we have to deal with our scope 2. Where we operate, Alberta is by far the most emissions intensive grid that we operate on. If you look at our emissions, about 80% of our emissions come from our electricity use within Alberta. So clearly, that's where we needed to make an impact, and thankfully the market was open in order to do that. As well, we weren't just able to go to our CFO and say, hey, let's pay a bunch of money for this, and we'll clean up our energy. We had to make some pretty good financial cases for it and find solutions that, our shareholders would accept, our company would accept, and wouldn't just cost us a bunch of money. So that's why we went with the PPA agreements, virtual PPAs, because they allowed us to get into that game without investing a ton of capital. Coming to the right agreement where the developer is happy with the price, we're happy with the price. We've extended our agreements to 25 years, which is not common. So building that confidence with our CFO and company that, find a company you can work together with for 25 years and feel comfortable with that relationship, that's not an easy thing to do. And, coming to terms with things like credit and how you're going to operate and, how you're going to work together for that long. So that took a lot of time and a lot of effort. Some lawyers made some good money on some of those negotiations. But yeah, and it took a lot. We had one agreement that we were the first off-taker for the first grid level solar farm in Alberta, Brooks 1. That negotiation was a little bit different, and then we went out to the market, and it took a few iterations. We worked with lots of different companies to get to where we got to, and we started to run into some of the supply chain issues that are exacerbated now, that caused some changes within agreements. Then we went through quite the process. Let's just say it was a lot, but we also learned a lot. So, we feel pretty confident in how we would approach another deal perhaps in the future.
Now, Dan, you're coming to that from the other perspective. So can you weigh in here on what it's like from that marriage of 25 years, I feel like you guys owe each other some crystal plates or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah, not on this particular
No,
deal.
sorry.
But actually, I just want to follow up on the whole idea that this is easy, because it is not easy. I've been doing this for 15 years, and we've been fortunate to have had a lot of success. But 15 years is a long time to to see a vision through to success. Renewable energy projects are extremely complicated deals to put together. There's the considerations around where you site the project, but there's all the permitting considerations, all the public consultation considerations. They're big, massive capital investments. Like our Travers project's a $700 million project. Funds and utilities don't make quick decisions about making a $700 million investment. Like these are really, really complicated deals that can be disrupted by macro forces that have nothing to do at all with the industry, like the geopolitical considerations around the Ukraine and the supply chain disruptions. These are all things that our industry has to grapple with, and we're having a lot of success right now, but I don't think we can take for granted that it's smooth sailing all the time, because it is not.
Just quickly to add on the time component, we tell all the renewable buyers, this is a complex transaction. It takes an average of 4 years if you don't have the right tools and templates. You need everybody on your team. If you're a corporation, you need legal, you need procurement, you need your finance team. If you don't have your CFO, frankly, I'm blunt, I'm telling them, your deal is a failure. You need your finance team. So with the right education and tools, and we focus on that at BRC Canada to shorten that period, because 4 years is a long time. We try to do like an 18 months to a year. It depends on the engagement of the corporation. So
That's wild. From 4 years down to like a year, 18 months?
I'm throwing an average just because every company is different in their engagement.
No, I'm quoting you on that.
The corporation, yeah.
And I know we did touch on this a little bit, and Jason, I think you mentioned it, this idea of like what other jurisdictions can learn from Alberta. And you coming at it from the Ontario perspective, I suppose, as well. But well, yeah, what lessons are there here for other places that might be looking at such a setup and going, yeah, Alberta, doing it right, let's be more like them? Because I'm sure that's everywhere in Canada and the world, right? Yeah.
Reluctantly so. But before I get there, let me just quickly say, I still think there's lots of runway in Alberta, too. Back in December 2019 or 2020, the Alberta system operator called us up and said, okay, we got some extra cash. We need you guys to do a study. Geez, we see a lot of wind and solar in the connection queue. Is that really going to happen? And what do we got to do about that? So we did an analysis, and we basically came up with, on the low end, over the next 20 years, another 6,000 megawatts, mid-range, another 12,000 megawatts. We shocked ourselves. And then we said, okay, let's look at jurisdictions with similar structure, similar governance, similar market. That's Australia and Texas. If someone told me 15 years ago that the connection queue for solar would outstrip gas by 15, 20 to 1, I would have said jump in a lake. But that's how it's happening, right? And I still think it's going to continue here. So there's lots of runway, and this is what I believe. What I see across the country, because my practice is all over the place, a lot of jurisdictions are envious of Alberta. Now, the trick is, all of those jurisdictions aren't going to all of a sudden deregulate, right? Because they're all dominated by large integrated utilities that own a lot of hydroelectric generation, and that stuff's been there for decades, right? So when you look at, especially Quebec, the price of electricity is pretty low, so they're not going to want to mess with that. But when you factor in decarbonization policies with the feds, some of the provinces, soon to be pushed down on all the provinces with the clean electricity standard and the regulation, coupled with, I think what's more so happening, the ground up. There's a lot of municipalities across the country that have climate plans, energy plans, and you just look in Alberta, Township of Banff, Canmore, I see Medicine Hat here, Edmonton's done deals, I know City of Calgary's looking at it, and other jurisdictions, other municipalities are looking to do the same. So everyone's faced with, how are we going to get more megawatts, right? So then the question is, if we're not going to quite do what Alberta does, what can we do? And in my opinion, if I park Ontario for a second, we need to look at what's happening in the US. And there's no reason why the integrated utilities across the country can't provide more service offerings in terms of green tariffs to right-size the price based on the attributes that certain customers want, or they can basically play matchmaker or do a speed-round dating game and hook up buyers like TELUS with suppliers like Greengate, just joking, and basically do a couple different deals and hook them up. And as far as Ontario is concerned, there's been a group, and Nagwan's part of it. I'm on the advisory board for BRC. I'm also the chair of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, and there's a lot of industry in Ontario. There's a lot of industry saying, yeah, I want that too. These are my corporate goals. Nagwan's mentioned ESG a couple times. And the price of renewables, wind and solar, are falling. And you look at the Ontario market, needs lots of supply. The Ford government, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, the far-right conservative Ford government in Ontario is actually contemplating unlocking corporate PPAs. The Ontario Ministry of Energy's chief of staff has basically said to BRC and Canria, bring me a pilot. And there's autos that want to line up and do this, there's retail, there's tech, there's other manufacturing. And when you kind of look at what's happened since they took office in 2018, they're not trashing decarbonization and climate change anymore. They're seeing the economic development opportunity to go along with decarbonization. So this is why I think this is going to happen by hook or crook across Canada. It's just a matter of governments and utilities and system operators listening to what customers want to meet policy objectives.
I actually want to throw to you here, Terry, because obviously TELUS operates in a fair bit of Canada, I'd say. I guess, are there any lessons that you guys have learned from anywhere else in Canada that you can apply, or think that what you've learned here in Alberta that can be applied in other parts of Canada?
Yeah, I guess when we look at our ESG and our targets and what we want to green our network as much as possible. Oddly enough, other than Quebec, Alberta's going to be the only place that we can say we're 100% renewable, because we're on grid power in Ontario and grid power in BC, and BC uses a little bit of natural gas to generate electricity, and obviously Ontario uses a mix of things. So so in Canada, we can't join RE100 and say we're 100% renewable unless we overbuy in Alberta to claim every megawatt we use in any jurisdiction. So it really does limit us in terms of how we approach meeting our targets and how we approach getting to net carbon neutrality if we can't do that in other jurisdictions. So we're certainly interested and really open to power purchase agreements outside of Alberta. That would be great. And that would be an important part of our strategy to hit those Scope 2 electricity related emissions. So yeah, we'd love to see it. There have been some projects in like BC and that we're working with municipalities, but you have to sell it all directly to BC Hydro, and the way to go about that is very, very, very complicated, and you're basically stuck with that, right? So it's not an open market. You're not negotiating. You're not looking at, partnering with a company that you really want to partner with. So it's a challenge, and I'd love to see more opportunities and anywhere they try and increase generation. I mean, if you've paid attention to the news in BC about building a new dam, it certainly hasn't been very popular. And a lot of people are saying, well, why aren't we doing renewables? And it just isn't really an option in BC, even though there are some places that offer some pretty good solar generation and wind within the province. So
yeah. I want to, and I've just noted at the time here, we might even have some interactive time here at the end, so think of questions, everybody. If there's anything you desperately need to get off your chest, you can do that too. It's fine. It's like a renewables therapy session. Dan, let me ask you here about, obviously, Alberta renewables probably going to keep growing, but what challenges do you see, if any, that might stop that or hinder that or generally place up some roadblocks?
I think Alberta's great because of the policy certainty that we've had for a long time, as Jason pointed out. So keeping that intact to the extent that we can, because you know, this is an industry that has the potential to be impacted, you know, by, you know, the wrong, you know, government policies. You know, I think, you know, the other thing, it's in Alberta, it's acute in Alberta right now because we are the, you know, like the renewable energy capital of Canada right now. We've got lots of projects in the queue, and I think the stress of that, like I don't think our grid in Alberta, nor the grids, you know, across Canada are set up to accept the amount of new power that we're talking about. Like we're talking about electrifying the world, right? Like we're talking about moving from fossil fuels to clean electrons as our primary source of energy in the world. You know, that means there's a lot of new renewables that need to be built in Alberta, across Canada. You know, CanRIA has talked about, you know, 5,000 megawatts a year, every year for the next 30 years. Like that's it's like a mind-blowing amount. So, you know, we need to invest in the infrastructure and, you know, the organizations that administer that process to ensure that that doesn't become a point that slows down our growth or hinders our ability to reach our potential.
I mean, Canada's not known for its sharesies when it comes to power, right, across provincial borders. So how do you tackle a problem like that? Is that even possible without, I don't know, policy or ideas? Like how?
Well, one of the things that makes Alberta great is that we have this market that works. And one of the things that's potentially a threat to that is it's a little bit counterintuitive, but you know, it sounds like if we share it across the country, it'd be great. Alberta being the only free market in Canada means that if we have the connections with the provinces to our east and west that have you know, subsidized energy, it could disrupt our market. So that's something that is complex, and I think a big point of you know, resistance to that happening. But Jason might have some ideas on whether that could be accomplished. Pass that grenade to you.
Careful with the design, Jason, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of the challenge is electricity is not viewed as a national initiative that's governed by, say, the Canadian energy regulator, right? Unlike in the US, other than Texas, everything's governed by the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So in my mind, we're probably in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the feds to step up, whether it's through the Canadian Infrastructure Bank or something. And it's akin to, you know, building railroads and things like that, as we did to facilitate the Industrial Revolution and colonization and all of that. I think the test case is the Atlantic Loop, right? So there's about 5 transmission projects that would connect the Newfoundland, Labrador, New Brunswick, and Quebec. And what's interesting about that is Quebec being the real elephant, period. From what I can tell, I mean, they're for it. And that's partially because they're seeing the broader picture, not so much politically to say, oh, okay, Canada wants to go net zero. They're thinking, I want access to more clean energy. I'm going to help lower rates in Quebec because of it. And I'm going to turn around and use those electrons and sell it to the Northeast Americans. So to me, if we can get the Atlantic Loop done, then I think other shoes will drop and we'll see other transmission over time across Canada. But it's got to be through the feds.
Well, interesting you mentioned that. Obviously, you know, does it take actual federal money, though? Because dollars are, oh man, they're hard to get out of Ottawa sometimes, aren't they? Or any government, really. So does it actually take money? Or do you look at something like, you know, what's happening in the United States, for example, right now with all of their extra incentives and stuff that they're getting?
Yeah, it takes money, and it takes money from the feds. We're just not wired to have private capital come in because almost all the transmission across Canada is rate regulated. And then once we have the hodgepodge of, again, the different provinces having oversight over those wires in their jurisdiction, and with the utilities the way they're structured, they're not wired to take in capital from the private markets, and then there's a rate of return. So it's really different. You don't have much merchant transmission across the country, so it is really, I believe, up to the feds.
And will the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, do you think, undermine potential growth here in Canada? And I'll throw that to Dan or Nagwan, either of you guys. Oh, Terry, whoever wants to answer.
Yeah, I mean, it has the potential to if Canada doesn't stick. I mean, there's global competition for capital. Canada's got a lot of really good things about it. We're a politically stable, place, well regulated. But that tilts the playing field in favor of the U.S. as a destination for capital. And I don't think the feds are doing enough in Canada. We have great ambition about where we want to go, but the amount of federal support to enable that is nowhere nearly enough, or nowhere near the level that we're seeing in the United States. For example, there's a 50% investment tax credit for carbon capture and storage, and there's a 30% tax credit for energy storage, which enables renewables, and no investment tax credit for renewables at all. There is one in the U.S. That's an example.
Right. So that has to change, essentially.
Well, I think if we want to remain competitive, we need to look at providing broader incentivization, investments in transmission, like we've been talking about. I think there's a bigger role for the feds, certainly.
Just to quickly add, the Inflation Reduction Act changes everything. Like, we're no longer leading on the energy transition regulations. We need to step up. It's a race to the top at this point. And we need we have the clean electricity framework, which basically wants to create a net zero grid. And this will be interesting to watch because we need a portfolio of clean energy sources to create a resilient, reliable, and affordable grid. We're feeling the pressure right now in our power bills because of natural gas, the volatility of it. So what is that future in that portfolio? We're not talking just decarbonization, we're talking electrification. And then we need to think about buildings, industrial operations. We need to think about these emissions and how are we going to displace them through electrification. And we need that all hands on deck approach and not just every jurisdiction doing its own thing. So.
Yeah, and I guess before we throw to some questions here, I'm just curious whether you'll think whether Alberta, and I know you track this, Nagwan, about how many deals are happening here, but do you think Alberta can continue on the trajectory that it's been on, which has been completely bananas, or do you think that things are going to taper off? And can other jurisdictions, I suppose, more broadly, can any other places catch up?
I think Dan will have a better sense here, but we produce a lot of renewables, but we still produce electricity mainly from fossil fuels, 90%. So we can still take some more. Our grid will need a facelift. We'll need to upgrade some elements in it. We will need interconnectedness as well with other provinces. Hello, interprovincial interconnectedness. That's what I mean by a national approach to this. There's still room for growth. It's not like we're producing gazillion of megawatts. Any thoughts here, specifically?
Well, like I said earlier, I mean, based on our analysis, we think there's lots of runway. We've been involved intimately with various processes, so we believe there's about 60 active prospective buyers in Alberta of all different flavors, whether it's local governments, just corporations, large emitters, and they're all trying to do things. But I think there's two things to keep in mind. So I don't know where the number will end up for 2022, but I think the long-term trend is it's going to continue. But I think what's happening right now are two things. One, it's a wide spectrum of prospective buyers. And I think a lot of the more sophisticated buyers have executed their PPAs and they might have filled up their boots already. I think a lot of others are trying to get in, and it's really complicated for them to figure out where the wholesale market's going, where policies like tier and whatnot are going. Are we really sticking to the trajectory of carbon pricing up to $170 a ton? And I think what's going on right now, this is the biggest reason why I think there's a little bit of a stall. It is getting harder for buyers, I think, to really figure out what's what, because you've got inflationary pressures coming out of COVID, You got the shock after that in terms of interest rates to cool down the economy and inflation. And then partially exacerbated because of the war in Ukraine and what's happening in Europe, you've got massive supply chain issues. So if buyers were challenged to really figure out the economics of the deal before all that hit, they're challenged right now to figure out what the real deal is. All they know is it's more expensive, but how much is too much, and is this going to last? So I think we are in a little bit of a lull, but I think when things clear up in terms of these different markets, it's going to keep on humming.
Just quickly on policy, Emma, like the boom we're seeing right now in Alberta is not accidental. Like we need innovative government policy to help this, to help the growth as well. So back in 2015, the government of Alberta created the REP program, the Renewable Electricity Program, which basically proved the business sense for the contract for difference approach. And the private sector took off from there. So it showed the economic value of this mechanism. So I want to see more of this. I want to see new innovative policies like that that facilitate more deals and more renewables.
I just, I think we're going to see, continued growth in this industry, but it's not something that's always, straight up. I think if you look at, now to 2030, we're going to see a ton more renewables built in this province and beyond that. But what's it going to look like on any given year? Who knows? There's things that can cause things to stall. But at the moment, there's still lots of renewables being built across this province, and it's a very, very exciting time to be in this sector.
What a time to be alive, as they say. Now we have about 8.5 minutes for questions. Oh, wow, at the back, already got your hand up there. All I can see is a black sleeve. Hey. G'day.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Glow and Mel reader, by the way.
Thank you.
Also, I went to do a public policy course, and Dan, I really appreciate your comments that how important public policy is, the different things that the province has done. First question is there anything else we can do in Alberta as far as public policy regulation to make this even better? And two, I thought that wind had become really cheap. In a number of years ago, the NDP government had 400 megawatts at 3 to 4 cents a kilo. So I don't know what has happened, but if that is still the case, why does that need to be subsidized by government? I thought that'd be a no-brainer for corporates to sign a 25-year contract and have a fixed price.
Go for it, Dan.
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, it is now.
Okay, I'll take it. So the costs of wind and solar are, both gone down at a tremendous rate over the last, decade. But recently we have seen supply chain disruptions, inflationary pressures, and, I don't think those assets would be contracting at that price today. But they're still very competitive pricing. The thing is, there's other parts of our energy industry that are being actively subsidized. So, for example, carbon capture and storage. There's a 50% investment tax credit there, and as soon as that gets introduced into the energy sector, I think there needs to be comparable support on the other side. Otherwise, it creates an unlevel playing field. And then you layer on top of that, the U.S. becoming relatively more competitive than Canada. And we just can't take for granted that the capital will always be flowing to Alberta, because it's something that's very fluid and changes over time. For the time being, it's great. But I'm anticipating, where things are headed based on, these factors that are unfolding in real time.
I'm sure I saw an arm over here. There we go.
Is that on? Oh, there we go. Okay, I was just wondering, when you guys were talking about policy changes and also facelift on the grid, and I wanted to ask you, Don, do you have solar on your house?
No, I don't.
Why is that?
because I've been focused on building the largest solar project in the country, 1.3 million solar panels spread over 3,000 acres of land. Should be completed by the end of the year, though.
That's okay, man. I don't have it either, right? But I pay extra so that the juice that I pull off the pole, somebody buys it off of a renewable, right? Understand? So I don't need solar to have renewable energy. But my question is, it seems to me that there's a barrier to installing solar, whether it's on a industrial scale where you can do peak shaving with batteries, or just on the home level, because they don't allow you to install more than a certain amount. And I just don't see, I see that as a solution, or at least a way to mitigate some of this grid overhaul requirements. I wondered what you thought of that.
Yeah, no, I think we need all of it. We need more, distribution level generation, rooftop generation, commercial buildings, homes. We need utility scale. We need we need a lot of clean energy going forward. So yeah, we need it all. As far as rooftop solar goes, there's some nuances there in terms of the value that you can capture as a generator, and I think the path needs to be cleared for more of that, so that the business case is stronger for individuals and companies to do that on site as well. But the reality is the economies of scale associated with with these really large projects is really tremendous, and that ultimately, as you point out, you can choose green energy. That is today the lowest cost green energy that you can source, I believe.
So I have a question. Actually, I do have a solar panels, and we recently bought an electric vehicle, and only to discover that you actually reach the capacity in your house of 100 amperes very quickly. So if I want to now have another large electrical piece of equipment in the house, I would need to actually dig half of the street and pay for parts of the infrastructure. So I'm just wondering if any of you can comment on residential infrastructure and how can we overcome that if we are going to electrify even more in the future.
Yeah, go for it, Terry.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is smart home energy management. You don't need to necessarily charge a car and run the washing machine at the same time. And anything that you can put in your home to help balance that. If you've got air conditioning, again, balancing those heavy users and a system that helps support that. And then I would go even further at the local distribution transmission level. A smart grid can solve a good portion of the issues. The one thing that I worry about is, as we get into more electric vehicles, which is great, if everybody, works a traditional 9 to 5, comes home, plugs their vehicle in at the same time, good luck. that's a difficult problem to solve, right? And then as we electrify more things, those local challenges are really going to exist. And so we talked about investment in that network. That really has to be there to enable that. And there's things that corporations can do, like if we have a smart energy solution that's available to residential customers, I think that would be popular. I'm sure there's other companies working on that as well. And that exact challenge, right? You have to invest a whole bunch of your money to upgrade your home just to have an electric vehicle.
I would add to actually both of the comments, two things. Electricity is governed from a top-down approach. And whether you're a transmitter or a distributor, you don't really have visibility and all the telemetry and all the technology to really know what's going on at the low end of the system in terms of what's happening in a home or a commercial business, a small load. So that has to change in terms of just the technology to read that. And I think the other thing is it's more of the ground-up approach that's needed, in the sense of we have to think about electricity and its use kind of from a different point of view. Again, not that top-down thing, but from the bottom up. And we have to then figure out how to incentivize the utilities to be proactive. And that's a regulatory matter, and it's a public policy matter. So it's, what does cost recovery mean? How do you design rates? And what are those incentives for the utility to be proactive? And if we're serious about decarbonization and electrification, then we need to get on with that. And I think that's where the stakeholders have to come in. They have to push governments and regulators that way.
Awesome, thank you. We're out of time. Look at that, we've 15 seconds to spare. But thank you everyone for coming along. I hope you learned something. Nagwan, Dan, Jason, Terry in at the last minute, champion. Thank you so much for being here with us to discuss Alberta's awesome renewables. Thanks everyone.